our first contributor is Lynne Sullivan, OBE. Lynne is an architect. She founded the Sustainable Design by Design organization, which won 3 BRE-sponsored passive house prototype competitions. She was previously Sustainability Director of Broadway Mallion and for 10 years Associate Director at ECD Architects. In our conversation before this event, she also said, going way back, that she used to work in retrofitting homes for Hackney Council, which you didn't put on your formal biography, Lynne, but I think that's very important. She's a design consultant, visiting professor and industry board member, including for the Active Building Centre and the Passive House Trust. She was awarded an OBE for services to architecture in 2011. She chairs the Good Homes Alliance, and she's a member of the CLC Green Construction Board since its inception. When I asked in a sort of pre-meeting whether anybody had anything to say about COP26, I was delighted that Lynne had been there and actually can give us some sort of feedback on the sort of conversations which were going on about retrofits, particularly in Scotland, which is interesting. So Lynne, over to you.
That was a long introduction, wasn't it? So I'll try sharing my screen. This will stop others screen sharing, yes. So yes, thank you for inviting me, and great to be here. Andrew asked me really to set the scene, and I guess my presentation is a kind of hopefully a good complementary introduction to Russell's presentation, because we've both been working on this national retrofit strategy. So okay, so basically Andrew's introduced me. I've been involved in retrofit, yes, and I started life as a housing action area architect for London Borough of Hackney, doing street properties, you know, sort of whole street renovation. So yeah, it's sort of come full circle a bit. But so my key message for today is really, we just cannot duck retrofit. Every task group I've been on, and I've been on a few, you know, highlights that, and we're just getting closer and closer to sort of pinpointing kind of really what needs to be done and what the impact of our existing buildings is in the context of our net zero journey. So as Andrew said, I've been a member of the Green Construction Board since it was set up as an independent advisor to government in 2011. And the first thing we did was in response to Paul Morell, the then Chief Construction Advisor's recommendations, to look at identifying exactly what emissions from the sector are and needed to be in the context of the net zero journey, which of course in those days was an 80% reduction over 1990 levels. And as you can see from the bottom left-hand corner, I mean, we were talking megatons of carbon here, but the big yellow blodges are heating energy in buildings and what they represented at that time in terms of carbon emissions, UK carbon emissions, so a big chunk. Yeah, so basically we actually got down to, you know, quite a lot of detail on what the expectations were, but we were talking carbon rather than energy at that time. And simultaneously, we commissioned a report from Verco on setting up a retrofit hub or building support mechanism. But and then we had an update of the route map, but that was kind of, I think, fell on deaf ears, because what happened shortly after that was the launch of the Green Deal, which I'll come back to. But yes, we basically highlighted, you know, the fact that in order to meet the then 80% reduction, halving or up to 2/3 of carbon reduction was required in our existing buildings, and that assumed in the 2020s, where we are now, that 75% of hard to treat properties needed energy efficient retrofit. And further to that, after the Green Deal, a few disasters. Rob Lamb and I, as part of the Green Construction Board, supported Peter Hansford, Paul Morell's successor, in his report on solid wall insulation, which was basically addressing the pitfalls and the unintended consequences of Green Deal. So, you know, as distinct from a measures-based approach, he came out firmly in favor of the whole building approach, and need for clear standards and compliance mechanisms, and, you know, better skills and accreditations. So, and the creation of a retrofit hub, and the role of leadership, and these recommendations will echo with some of the detail that I'm sure that Russell will talk about in relation to our current proposals. And following on this, government set up the Each Home Counts, the Bonfield Review, and subsequent to that, of course, the PASs related to ECO, PAS 2030 and PAS 2035, and kind of the rest is current history, really. And following on that, in 2019, I, on behalf of Green Construction Board, set up the Building Mission Task Group, because we kind of leapt at the chance to respond to a policy announcement to halve all building energy use by 2030. Well, that was actually for new build, but just for retrofit, halve all building energy use. Without going into any great detail, our key recommendations in the background report were, you know, analyze total energy, where we're at now, look at where you can tackle the energy efficiency role in emissions reduction. In this case, I included this illustration from the Energiesprong report, transition to net zero. Oops, wrong way. And then following on that, we made some recommendations in relation to retrofit, which are kind of set out here, calling for a national retrofit plan, calling for the deployment of digital building passports, a need for a leadership and national program and communications, particularly and advice, the need for minimum performance thresholds and verifications on completion. So we didn't get a massive performance gap in retrofit as well. So that was when I came upon Russell and his work for NEF, and at the CLC's RM, Repair Maintenance Improvement Group, we kind of coalesced because there was a great deal of synergy between our journeys, if you like. And Russell will talk more about the interlock of standards and basically the national retrofit strategy, which is now endorsed by CLC, which it estimates that a 97% of the stock needs energy efficiency retrofit by 2040. So, Andrew, I'm trying to rattle through. I hope I'm going quick enough. A couple more slides. At the same time as sort of promoting the national and refining the national retrofit strategy, I was also working with Letty on their climate emergency retrofit guide, which analyzes the UK stock and works back from actual studies of energy efficient retrofit and decarbonisation, because using heat pumps, with archetypal classifications, typical packages, and, you know, comes out with a kind of median energy demand that we should be aiming at. And at the same time, I was also working with UK Green Building Council on the steering group of the whole life carbon route map. And no surprise, I also inputted with others on the retrofit guidance. Well, not guidance anymore. It's, you know, some much more specific level of energy and carbon impacts of our existing buildings and where we need to get to meet the Paris targets. So actually this was the thing that was launched at COP, Andrew, the only thing that was in the blue zone, I think, of consequence for our industry, other than, you know, pioneering leadership from private sector. And but, you know, it remains to be seen how the advice to policymakers from UK Green Building Council and indeed our national retrofit strategy, where it's going to land, if at all. But yes, if you delve deeply into the roadmap, the UK GBC model, you know, they have to put actual numbers into a model. It's no good putting EPCC in. You know, it had to get real, and the median energy demand of retrofitted properties aligned with the national retrofit strategy and the LETI work. So, you know, that's pretty key, and they actually specifically reference the national retrofit strategy as well as a key a strategy on the road to whole life net zero. So just to bring us kind of bang up to date, there's a couple of things I picked up. Actually, I noticed I've cropped half of that, but you know, the Daily Telegraph a few weeks ago saying actually to put heat pumps in, you need a massive upgrade of the network capacity. I did reference earlier on one of my slides, you know, the background to both the LETI work and our previous work was really looking at the potential for grid decarbonisation and realising that we had way to go on this unless we suddenly invented nuclear fusion or something. And so the assumption is that we have to retrofit with heat pumps and a decarbonised grid. So yeah, there's the district network operator issue, which, you know, they're saying, you know, it could really cost householders to upgrade the capacity of their system. And at the same time, the Heating and Hot Water Industry Council, representing all those installers, realise the spotlight's on them, because Boris is only talking about heat pump installations at the moment, not energy efficiency. But if it all goes onto them, their report, this report I'm looking at here, is really, really interesting, because they're pointing out all the difficulties that they potentially face. And one of them, I haven't mentioned it here, was actually a proxy for energy efficiency, which they do highlight as a key component. A proxy for adding 25 mil of insulation. We're not quite sure where that is. But, you know, clearly, I don't think the heat pump installers are going to be able to deal with that. So last slide, we had the heat and building strategy prior to COP, which I've done a markup, and I've got so many references to energy efficiency as an important part of decarbonising existing buildings. But there are no new programs on this front. So we're really trying to grapple and align a lot of industry initiatives which align with our national retrofit strategy proposals, not least the Green Finance Institute, who have embraced the idea of digital building passports as a key component for private finance into retrofit. So I'm sure Russell will touch on some of this, but that's kind of where we're at in a little potted history.
Do you have any idea of the sort of numbers we're talking in the numbers that are understood by sort of householders? How many homes that we're dealing with here that are in private ownership, and how many that are publicly owned? To give us an idea of the scale and what sort of rate of change we're looking for.
Well, I think Russell will be able to deal with that, but we are basically talking about only, I think it's 20 or so % is in public ownership. So all the rest is in private ownership. I think actual owner occupiers is more like around the 60% mark. But yeah, I mean, given that great big lump of carbon, the fact that the heat and building strategy does not propose any support for energy efficiency is quite an irritant really at the minute. But what I've been doing in the Cambridgeshire region is talking with people about the journey to decarbonisation, like mini citizen assemblies. And, you know, they're keen, but they just don't understand what it means to have a heat pump, you know. So people, you know, there's a great need for this leadership piece and the comms piece and the guidance. And then hopefully that could be a fit with finance for people who feel at the moment energy efficient retrofit is a you know, choice for the wealthy.
Great, thank you. Now, moving on to our next contributor, Russell Smith. I met about, I think, 15 years ago when my own small contribution to this world was putting together an exhibition for the then Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, called Lower Carbon Drive. We put it on Trafalgar Square, and it was there to demonstrate to probably the most prominent place you could find in London, how you could reduce your energy consumption in an existing house. And a number of people came to contribute to our program of events around this, including Russell, who was undoubtedly 15 years ago the man on the front line, persuading homeowners that if they were going to have an extension built, they could also do some really good extra retrofit in terms of energy performance. So Russell's been ahead of the game for a long time, and now is involved in putting together the national retrofit strategy along with Lynne and others. So Russell, give us your take on where we are and how COP26 may or may not have done, and the sort of things that you do in training. You sent me your notes, you said you've trained over 1,000 people in an energy retrofit.
Yeah, can you see my presentation, by the way, everybody?
Yep.
When you give me that kind of introduction, Andrew, and so I've been trying to do this for 20 years, and look at what's actually happening, you think it's actually pretty depressing. So thanks for that. Yeah, no, I will touch on those points. Thanks. So for those that don't know what I do and have not heard from me before, I'm a specialist in domestic retrofit and have been so for as long as Andrew's pointed out. I started on my own home 20 years ago, actually, Victorian semi, on average the most average house in the country. Solid build, solid walls, terrible windows, lots of remediation work that needed to be done in order for this to work. And I'm a civil engineer, and I didn't really know much about this kind of thing at all. And I was deeply depressed how I could not get any professional advice on getting this home decarbonised. And I took it upon myself really to work it out. Ended up, my first trainee was the builder that ended up being on the job. The next few trainees were people that were working in building control and planning in the local council, and we kind of all worked it out for ourselves as it went along. But what the upshot of this was 3,000 people came to visit the house over the course of 2 years to come and have a look at what this nutter was up to. And really, it born out of this was the fact that there is interest, there are people willing to do it, and there's an industry that really does not have a clue. So for me, it was a start of a journey that's ended up with me designing some software around the sort of the algorithms I used to work out what was required for this building. And then it branched out a little. So I ended up, many of those 3,000 people that came to my home ended up as customers because they wanted to do it for themselves. And this is actually the modeling that we did in the early iterations of our software, the energy consumption of the houses around my own home. So this is Sutton in South London. These are all Victorian semis and terrace properties, all built within 5 years of each other around about 1900. So these are houses that are similar in their archetype. They've got similar weather. So there's not very much that's influencing their performance other than slight changes in their structure and the way that those buildings are used by the occupants. And you can see the size of the pie here is the annual energy consumption, the total compared to one another, so different size pies, but the consistency of that pie is according to see the key on the left-hand side there. You'll not see one pie that's like any other pie on that chart. Yet the way we advise people at a grand level with our EPCs, etc., on an automated basis, frankly, is giving people, frankly, very common advice on the way they should take their first steps. Every home is completely unique. So to think about us taking on this challenge of the retrofit of 27 million buildings in the UK and doing anything other than a mass customization approach, we're going to end up with the wrong answer, with people missold, with the wrong technologies going into the wrong buildings, etc. So really what I've been trying to do ever since then is to try and understand how we can get something in place that would enable professionals to give advice at the right stages, for the industry to be trained in the right way so that they're putting the right things in the buildings, and hopefully we get some some approaches that end up with the right things in the right houses delivered by people that are competent. And as Lynne said, we end up with an outturn of the project with performance of the building that's vaguely as was promised at the start. We're nowhere near that. So what we've tried to do with work with the Construction Leadership Council is to try and understand how we can at last galvanise industry around a common plan. My mantra for many years has been, we're never going to get a government to sort this out. We've got to do it ourselves. But look where we are. We're still miles away. And I'm fairly convinced now that we're at a stage where there are some elements that, of this national plan that only government can unlock, and we really need to try and get something in place to enable them to at least come to the table to be part of the story, rather than, as they are at the moment, sitting around the table thinking about how they can solve this themselves, and then at some point they'll surprise us with the answer. The bottom line is that we've got an enormous number of properties to retrofit. Now, perhaps we can touch on your particular question, Andrew, on how many is it and what rate later. I haven't gotten those in my slides particularly. But what it does mean, and what we did was we modelled using Parity Projects pathway software. We've got techniques that allow us to model every individual address within a large geographical area. So, for instance, we've got every dwelling in London modelled, Greater Manchester, some of rural areas, and at the moment we've got 18 million houses in the UK within our model. So we're enabled to do sort of policy level analyses. And we basically looked at the existing stock and the gap between that stock, the measures that need to be installed by net zero performance, which we targeted as 2040 in line with the IPCC recommendations. And the headline from that basically is that the pace we need to move, we need another 400,000 people in our industry to do that work. Otherwise, it just ain't going to happen. That is an enormous number. The good news is it impacts on every part of the UK. Every person that be working on that work could be working in their town, in their village. They would be coming from those places. So any stimulus from that economy would be beneficial to where those things are actually happening. But what it does need is leadership and messaging and education of not just industry, but occupants of their buildings as well. So to know that this is a thing that they need. So it needs some kind of, not an agency that's going to do the delivery itself, but an agency that can pull everyone together to get the messaging out, to provide the inspiration, to know that the messaging is getting through in the right way. And the Olympic Delivery Authority and the way it delivered everything in 2012 was seen to be something that managed to achieve that. And I know this isn't a 4-year program. This is much longer. However, the ethos is something that we grabbed onto. 120,000 indirect and indirect jobs would be created in year 1 alone, but up to 520,000 created by year 5. And this is based on an S-curve type rollout. In other words, going big quickly and aiming to get this thing moving straight away would be nonsensical, because those 400,000 people haven't arrived in the industry yet. And frankly, the training sector, further education, higher education, don't know what to be training people on either. So we need to be working that through as well. CO2 savings are obviously huge if we make this happen, but by retrofitting every home, we aren't going to decarbonise everything completely. So there is still some offsetting to be done somewhere else. But the key thing about this is interlocking components. There are a number of elements here, and we've called them interlocking because you take any one of these away and the whole thing will fail, which is obviously the reason why most initiatives government have tried over the last 20 years since I've been in this have failed, because they've tried 1 or 2 of them on their own and not all of them at once. So we've talked about the leadership thing on the top left. I'll go on to the right first of all. So performance standards, having something that enables us to target a property and how it performs and make promises you can keep. So that's about actually working with building regulations, for instance, that are not just about components as they are in Part L, but how the whole thing ought to perform. There is more than enough finance out there to make this happen, but the finance industry does not trust the model on which we all perform right now. They will come if we can prove that we can do this. We've touched on training and accreditation. I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. Materials and equipment, bringing the supply, the manufacturers and distributors of stuff into this, particularly now as it's such a volatile sector. We need to tell them what we need for the next 20 years, and they need to tell us how unlikely that is so that we can plan around it. Creating customer demand. I think we should have a stream on this. My version of this with the schemes we're running in Oxfordshire and London is we've got too many customers to handle. They will come if they trust you. And a compliance and quality regime to make sure you get rid of all the cowboys, in short. But just as here's a graphic of what it means in terms of the numbers of people that need to come into the sector to do this work. And I'm focused on trades here, but equally, we've got to focus on professionals as well that need to either retrain or refocus their business models to work on this. It's a huge difference. And again, that mirrors the S-curve profile that we've planned here, because we want these people to go on to other things when retrofitting is sorted, but here's the business plan. In terms of it being a UK PLC business model, it's a no-brainer, because most of this money will come from the private sector if we provide them with a model that they can trust. Sure, we want government to put some structures in place, be it incentive schemes or some of these things that enable us to police quality, etc. But actually, the revenues that would come into government on this basis, this is all tried and tested stuff that's come out of Leeds University as well, will reflect back in government, and it is an investable proposition from a government perspective. And key thing here is what we're talking about in terms of numbers. In terms of a project, it's a £525 billion project. Look at it in terms of the other things we are doing right now across our country, both in terms of infrastructure, but in terms of things like the banking bailouts, it's similar. I think the other thing it'd be worth bearing in mind, the value of our housing stock goes up every year by around about 350 billion. So if we're looking at this in terms of equity release, if we can ever find a model that doesn't look a bit dodgy, that would be a great way to try and get this moving as well. So we can all share in the benefits of this thing happening. So the answers are there. These might be big numbers, but if we look at them in terms of each individual property, I think we've got mechanisms there, but we need the leadership to make this happen. And I want to remind you, retrofitting these buildings on their own will not get them to zero carbon. When we look at it in terms of the mass stock there is there. So looking forward to enjoying conversation about this. I couldn't cover every single element, but one thing I would say is that I imagine that most of the people on this call are mainly professionals, certainly rather than tradespeople like myself. The bottom line is design is the easy bit. Everything around the design that makes that room for the design, that makes the person do the design in the right part of the journey rather than when it's too late. That's the stuff that is really, really hard that I've been concentrating on for the last decade. I'm very happy to talk at length about how we can put the sort of processes in place and reconstitute our industry so that the right things can get done at the right time and trained professionals can be part of this journey. Thanks a lot.
Russell, thank you very much. Can I ask you a quick question? Because in my view, the private homeowner has a lot of potential, both in terms of funding, in terms of being the trained person in the knowledge base for at least their own property and maybe even for some of their neighbours. Is it in your model that what percentage or what potential that might have, or is it not something you've looked at in that sort of level of detail?
So is this a household or as an advocate?
Yes, and also as a self-financing advocate for things that they can do for themselves. Oh yeah, well sure. I mean, interestingly, those hundreds of people that are coming forward for our schemes in London and Oxfordshire right now are those people that have the money. But I would say even those people are fairly skeptical at the start. They usually come approaching from the point of view of they already have a plan, and we have to kind of talk them out of what they thought they wanted to do in order to do the right thing. But we show them the options. The maths tells them. We're not eulogizing about particular things. We're saying the maths are telling you that actually it's a good idea to do these things before you put your kitchen in, etc. So that's really important. But there's a very long way to go. I mean, the good news from my perspective in keeping my feet on the ground is my wife doesn't believe a word of it. So I have to have these debates even in my own house, okay? And I've been talking to my mum for 15 years about doing this stuff, and the penny dropped for her when she managed to speak to a complete stranger on the bus last week. It's just like, wow, how do you get through to everybody, right? I've been speaking to her for 15 bloody years. So
we've got to try every route. And I think advocates is a cracking way of doing that. Personally, if somebody were to say to me, here's 50 million quid, Russell, how would you best spend that to get the whole retrofit sector moving? I would get builders to retrofit their own homes, because they are the best advocates out there. And they're usually the people that are talking Mrs. Miggins out of doing the retrofit because they've never heard of it before. So the advocates come from many different sectors of our society and industry, and we have to mobilize all those guys. Would be a really great way of getting this whole sector moving.
Great, thank you very much. Well, I mean, that segues very nicely into our next speaker, who is undoubtedly an advocate by doing. Ben Ridley, he's an architect. He founded his firm Architecture for London in 2009. He's since designed a number of widely published and award-winning projects. He's a certified passive house designer with significant expertise in design of low energy buildings. And he's just completed a low energy refurbishment of his own home in North London, which was part of the open house weekend, which I got wrong in my diary. So he very kindly gave me a personal tour, which was very kind of you, Ben. And there are at least 100 other properties exactly the same, apart from one of them's end of terrace, which is yours. But Ben, firstly, can you tell us what you got up to with your house, and how this might be, you become an advocate for the industry that Russell's talking about?
Sure. Yeah. Hi everyone, and thanks for the introduction, Andrew. Yeah. So I can let me share my screen. I'll take you through what we did at my house. So zooming right into the detail of a single project, really. And can everyone see the screen okay then? Yeah, great. So yeah, it's a very typical London house, like Andrew mentioned. It's end of terrace, so it has extra exposed walls. But other than that, it's very typical. It's Edwardian, 1907 it was built. And yeah, so the aim for me was for it to be an exemplar for myself and for the practice of what can be done on a budget. And it aims to balance three things. So it's budget, sustainability, and aesthetics, which I think all of those three things are equally important for the practice. And as well as the retrofit, we did a loft conversion and a rear extension. So the target was the NFIT criteria where possible. So that's the slightly easier version of passive house aimed at retrofit projects. And also solving, there's quite a few problems with mold and condensation in the ground floor because of previous bad repair work and cement renders and all the usual culprits. So solving those. And yeah, it was developing and testing the principles that maybe our practice could apply to other retrofit projects and larger multi-unit schemes potentially. So initial SketchUp PHPP modeling. There were some issues that made it challenging to reach full benefit certifications. One was the budget. Two was again that compromise of aesthetics and wanting to retain traditional sash windows at the front and also the original front door. And I should have said on the previous slide, the images on the left there were the existing or previous, and the photo on the right is the finished project. So really it was to retain that Edwardian facade, sash windows and front door, but then at the back there wasn't really any aesthetic value. So at the back we externally insulated everything, which you can see going on there, and it's solid masonry construction. And at the front we internally insulated with wood fiber, which you can see on the image on the right. And so the aim really was low U values, air tightness, and MVHR, which is mechanical ventilation and heat recovery. And that essentially deals with the ventilation you need in the house, but doesn't mean you just have to open a window in winter. It brings in preheated, fresh, warm air and then circulates that around the house. So some of the details: 170 mil external phenolic insulation to reach 0.15, which is the passive house target. Where we insulated internally at the front, that was done with wood fiber because of its breathability and potential issues of condensation. And again, it doesn't perform as well, and you have to use slightly less of it. So it's 60 mil max is recommended, just so you keep the external brick a little bit warmer to kind of move that dew point outside of the wall. Yeah, and then triple glazing to all new windows except the front elevation. So the strategy at the front was to have new double glazed sashes with secondary glazing inside of that, which was something we tested. All of the new windows at the back are triple glazed Velfac or oak framed bespoke units. Continuous air tightness layer. So that's either an Intello plus membrane to any timber construction. So that's the loft conversion or the rear extension or the floor of the house. Or for existing masonry walls, just a simple 12 mil lime plaster finish, which apparently is airtight if you use a thick enough layer like that. And that gave us our aesthetic finish because you don't need to paint lime plaster as well. You get a nice kind of quality and a natural variation of the lime. And then we looked at embodied energy, so things like carrying on the suspended timber floor in the rear extension, so we don't have to have a big concrete slab, avoiding concrete, so a stone floor instead of polished concrete floors. And we didn't have any steels at all in the loft conversion, which is actually really straightforward to do on a typical Victorian house. Also things like retaining masonry nib walls downstairs to give you the lateral stability rather than putting in big steel box frames. You can just have a single steel above. And then so some details on the wall build-up. So yeah, you just have to be go into slightly more depth than usual and think about the build-up at each part of the building. We did consider using aerogel for some of the tighter elements, but it got value engineered out in the end and we went for wood fiber. And yeah, from that, the details showing the ground floor plan with the rear extension here, new triple glazed windows going in at the side. And then some of the key challenges working with a small contractor that hadn't done much retrofit, low energy retrofit before, balancing the extra architectural time without loss of design quality, thinking about MVHR runs and designing those in earlier. And we had some problems with the MVHR cupboard dimensions on site, which steadily grew much larger than it was supposed to be. Budget issues meant we didn't have renewables, so we still have a gas combi boiler, but the strategy was really just to bring the heat demand down as much as possible, and then in future perhaps we can look at air source heat pumps. And so successes. So it's a really comfortable home, both in summer with the exposed thermal matter and in winter, obviously being much warmer. Dampness has been resolved, and I suffer from hay fever, but last year was the first year I didn't have any real problem with it. So so far that seems to suggest some reduction in allergy issues. That's because of the MVHR filters the incoming air, and the same thing there, it deals with the air pollution. We live next to a busy road, so yeah, it's quite reassuring to know that the air quality internally should be a bit better because of the MVHR filter. And just some photos of the result. That's the new jungle garden. Some of the stone and timber finishes in the bathroom That's Astrid the cat. You can see that enjoying the new underfloor heating and warm interior. Yeah, some photos. So that's the more traditional part of the house at the front with the bay and the stained glass. So the stained glass is the only single glazed element left, but we dealt with that with secondary glaze layer inside of that. So it's definitely not passive house detailing, but yeah, again, sort of balance of aesthetics there. That's the bedroom at the front. So all solid timber Douglas fir there, so fairly low embodied energy, and ground floor timber and stone finishes. Yeah, and then at the rear, that's a big triple glazed unit and triple glazed door opening out onto the garden, and it's a SIPS rear extension. So that's a 172mm insulated SIP construction. So it's super insulated and relatively airtight, prefabricated. So hopefully close the construction gap a bit, being installed by the experts. Yeah, and then the front elevation. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. There's been a few eyebrows raised in the chat about whether £250,000 is a tight budget, but I do know that you were very careful about sort of costing the benefit of things, because almost my first question is are you going to put in a heat pump? And you told me that would be too expensive. So do you want to respond to that, or wait until we get to talking about the cost of things and how you value those? Because I thought it was very interesting in your position statement. You said you've got to think about the amount of time before that house will have any opportunity to do the sort of retrofit that you did. So I thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah, so I think the 250K figure is possibly a bit misleading in that obviously we refurbished the whole house at the same time. So maybe only 10% of that was about the low energy retrofit, and the rest was new bathrooms, new kitchen, new floor finishes, extending at the rear, loft conversion, all of those things. And I know it's a lot of money, but in the scheme of things and on London projects, it's relatively modest, if anyone can believe that. Yeah.
And this question of the amount of time that were you thinking about sort of 30, 40 years away and possible changes over that time, or is that something that is too difficult to do?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess the one thing in the broader picture is just thinking about the 2050 target and knowing that my house, it isn't going to be refurbished again by that, and to get anywhere near net zero, we need to do that low energy retrofit now on every project that we work on. So yeah, I guess that's the thought. But I don't have detailed calculations on how long it will take to recoup that say 10 or 20% spent on the low energy. But anecdotally, we've lived in the house about a year now, and I think the bills for space heating have come down about 80%, something like that. So if that gives any indication.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I think that's a really useful measure. I have to say that's how I do it in my own home. So anything that I do, I just say, does it make a difference to the bill and how much? But so yeah. Our next and final presentation is from Eleanor. I see, Eleanor, yep, you're going to share your screen, so off you go. That's fantastic. And Eleanor is head of the Department of Architecture and Built Environment in the University of the West of England, and Professor Marco specialises in the crossover between health, sustainability and architecture. Known for her work on stuff and space in the home, and over the last 19 years in both practice and academia, she's made a major contribution to the field of built environment education, especially in sustainability and the diversity agenda, which I think my own view is the diversity agenda has a role to play in this. But I'll leave that to you, Eleanor, to tell us where we are.
It's just really always really tricky when you know you've got an audience that is perhaps not on the field of academia as kind of I normally do. So I thought, oh my goodness, how do I face them and tell them what my wicked problems to make sure the next generation of built environment professionals are educated to meet the climate change challenges. And I think it was Russell talk about education and leadership, and the fact that higher education doesn't know what we are training. And I thought, I do. I know what I'm trying to do. So let me kind of show you my wickedness. What are my challenges? And that hope will lay the discussion of what Ben, Russell, and Lynne presented today. And I saw in the audience that there is certain people that are in my field that perhaps will find these similar challenges that they have. So the first one is leadership. What is leadership in climate change and how we lead it? For me, in a way, the way my students ask me or interacted with me saying, we do want climate change skills in our curriculums. We want to know more, was thanks to Greta. She, as a, you could say as a young adolescent, actually told us that the house is on fire. A lot of people in this audience have been convinced that it's on fire for many years, but she changed the awareness or make some people hear what we have been talking about for over 20 years. And she also made me reflect, of how do I ensure that what I teach in the third largest department of architecture and the built environment in the UK can actually help you as industry. However, I did a little piece for Richard Lorch in Building Cities, in which I was telling them about my challenges. You know, you have got a wicked problem of climate change, and you have got the wicked problems of educating the next generations. When I have to deal in my daily job, kind of, if you think in the slide, this is me, and I have to deal with equality, diversity, student race expectations, lack of enough research funding to make a step change, variable student fees, attainment gap, raise inflation. Is it worth it? Now we have got free speech, and associated with that, we have got all the climate change agenda that I need to make sure that at the same time is fully embedded in every single program that it is in the department that I lead. So I thought I would put a picture like Greta, and I would say, this is me against the wall, and you have to think about it within the context of 3,500 students, but probably since 2005 that I've been battling this, and 7 years as a head of department, probably I have got around 20,000 students that I kind of have graduated trying to embed those skills, or at least have a mindset to ensure that they are open to ensure that climate change is part of the working practices of everything that they do. So this is me, that's me in my Greta moment. I have got 16 different professions to handle: RTPI, RIBA, ARB, SIPSI, ISTRACT, IMIKE, Royal Geographical Society, SIPSI, and you go on and on and on and on. 14 professional bodies, 3,500 students, 180 staff with very different opinions of what it should be taught, how it should be taught, and why it should be taught. 100 associate lecturers from industry that bring a completely different perspective. Then I deal with university management that has got a completely different view, student societies, yourselves as industry, and of course, government policy and bills. So when I go through all this list and try to kind of make change of how you lead, how you change, how you focus, how you take people with you, I would say that sometimes you feel like, oh my God, I'm not achieving much. But two things I realized, and that has been my focus, and has been my focus in the last 7 years as a head of department. I've driven climate change and diversity. And I realized me on my own could do very little. So the first thing I did is a drive for recruitment of people with the sustainability skills and the diversity background that could bring different voices and could make step change on what was delivered in the department that I lead. Because if you don't have that critical mass, regardless of how much training you do for those existing staff, it's very difficult because it's not embedded in everything that we do. Now we have got passive house assessors within the team. We have got people that has got kind of IIS. They are able to kind of do daylighting calculations. They can get the nitty-gritty as well as perhaps like green infrastructure or how you deal with well-being, health and well-being. But I also have done that driving the diversity perspective. So I have got, of the 180 staff, I have got 35 very different countries with very different perspectives and people that bring different voices into the table of how we should focus, not just from the point of view of UK-centric, but thinking the impact that we can have in the world much more globally. And at the moment in time, every year, I have got a year email when I'm thinking about next year and setting the agendas. And remember, I have got every single built environment profession, QSs, real estate, planners, environmental engineers, architects, technologists, you go on, and I've got them in my department. So kind of changing the mindset has been critical because at the moment, we as an industry work like silos. And my game has been try to make them work as a coherent, collaborative team that actually breaks those silos and starts embracing the climate change challenges and the diversity challenges that our professions have to make sure the mindset of those graduating in my school actually are going to make a difference in your companies, your industry. And it's not kind of something that has been easy to do. I would say that now, I would say that in architecture, 85% of every single brief in a studio environment has got sustainability at the heart. And I would say that across every single other built environment courses, there is around 40% of actually solid content in terms of the climate change challenges that will range from land property, landlord and tenant, to circular economy, to kind of the hardcore calculations. And that only can be done by a strong and, I would say, savvy leadership. Because sometimes this feels like the Titanic. You know, you try to do this, people has got very different elements, and it's just you're trying to kind of keep it going, and it sinks. But the problem I see is sometimes we focus in policies, bills, or even laws that are actually not making the necessary step change for me to be able to continue influencing from higher education. I do wonder if some of the promises in relation to our decarbonization will be pulled back because number 10 has been partying too much. So for me, it's about my personal leadership is continue excellent in everything like I do. I continue to make sure that I make step changes, step by step, year on year, trying to kind of change the mindset of every single member of the staff, associate lecturer from industry, and a student that comes through my higher education school that I lead. A big challenge, I think a big piece of work, but day by day is chipping away for change. Thank you. And you can follow me in social media. I'm a crazy kind of trying to kind of advocate for this.
Fantastic, thank you, Eleanor. I'm signing up. I think that's really good. I want to immediately say that Russell is looking for 400,000 people to join this industry for just this one task, not all of construction planning and all the other things. So are they going to come from you? Are they going to come from your university? I'm going to ask you that, and then I'm going to ask Russell.
I hope so. I would say, like, I have got 71 jobs now given, I would think, within the audience. I think so. I think it's about mindset changing, making sure. So we have got some of our students now making a difference, working for BASE, being the deputy head of sustainability, working in the biggest companies. And I can see some of you here today, especially Bureau Happel. Bureau Happel, actually, the Happel Foundation sponsors our architecture and environmental engineering course, which is an integration that we started in 2007, and only the Happel Foundation actually supported for us, which was amazing. And you know, you've got people in the audience like Lynne, Robin Nicholson, that we continue to champion those agendas going forward. So for me, I think they will come from me, but there's also people like, I saw Chris Tweed from Cardiff in the audience as well, you know, that there are universities that they are doing fantastic work trying to change the mindset of not just the kind of architecture, engineering, but the whole built environment professions.
Great, Russell, I'm going to put you on the spot. And where do you think you're going to find that 400,000 that you're looking for?
Well, multiple places, actually. I mean, the 400,000 I quoted is just the tradespeople. You know, you're going to need a huge number of people that are professionals to do this. I mean, I come from a civil engineering background. I mean, we should be using less concrete, so let's get the civil engineers out of there. And using our knowledge as professionals to improve what we've got and treat housing as an infrastructure priority, rather than it being something that's thrown at creating things that are meant to stimulate the economy in other ways, as an economic tool rather than something that's genuinely going to improve millions of people's lives in a trice. I think they're going to come from a lot of different places, actually. I mean, if you look at what we need to do, if I look at my little world of home refurbishment, it's usually the place that people go to because they've run out of ideas and options when you work in that sector, or because your dad did it. Not necessarily because it's an aspirational thing you're desperate to go and try. There are exceptions, of course, but one thing I learned, I spent 10 years working for Balfour Beatty about, you know, I did a lot of work in systems management, project management, that kind of stuff. I was able to bring that into a refurbishment sector that had none of that at all. Yet, and we still train up building contractors. I'll give an example. We're working with a fantastic building contractor in Oxfordshire right now that's been very busy in the area. It doesn't know what a method statement is, never used a contract with a householder. I mean, this is just balmy stuff. But you know, you can give all these guys that stuff and they take off as a company with much more surety. So they can come from lots of different backgrounds. You know, people that are working in service industries could come into this sector because the renovation sector is devoid of it, frankly. You know, a little bit of a smattering of good customer service goes a hell of a long way to enable customers to come back and recommend those companies to others like them. So I think we need people from lots of different areas. And some of the work we were doing very early on in this with Lynne and others was actually looking at the people that were on furlough, because those stats were available. Huge numbers of baristas that I would welcome into the retrofit sector with open arms, because they bring lots of skills that we don't have. So let's not look at a particular background that we might expect to come into this, because we'll end up agreeing with each other and probably agreeing on the wrong things. I think one thing about my business and why it's lasted so long is that we all don't really get on very well at the board. Yet we always end up with the right answer because we desperately disagree with each other.
That's great, thank you. But I'm going to disagree and just say that I think, you know, I'm going to ask actually, is domestic though different? Because I always remember asking somebody from Japan, you know, how often they expect their houses to last, and the answer is, for them, once a generation, you're likely to build again, and it's part of the sort of cycle, the rhythm of life in general, that you get involved in some way in building the place that you live. So I think the homeowner is hugely significant in this, and perhaps is underestimated a bit. But I'm going to ask you, Ben, how did you learn the skills that you needed to retrofit your own home? Was it part of from the university, or it was professional practice?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't get much at university, but it was mostly in professional practice, really. And I did the Passive House course about 5 years ago, so that was a bit of a baptism of fire. Yeah, I think since then it's kind of grown through trial and error, and hopefully not too much error, but also people like the Green Building Store have been really helpful with design, MBHR design details, all of those kind of things. Yeah, and I think, I mean, I guess the one real positive for us is that 5 years ago, when I was starting on my journey, it was very hard to persuade our clients to think about low energy retrofit, but now nearly all of our clients are coming to us demanding it. So something's definitely changed in that time, which is really exciting for us.
That's great. I'm going to bring in some of the chat questions. Bill Bordas, I'm starting in completely the wrong order. Bill Bordas is asking whether we need to look for bottom-up network solutions, not delivery agencies. What do you think, Lynn? Did you see that question in the chat?
Yeah, I did. It was interesting because I was on a design council workshop this morning. We focused a lot on retrofit, and we're talking about the importance of community and you know how that kind of grassroots understanding is absolutely key. I mean, I just don't think it's either or. But what we've had to grapple with the national retrofit strategy is that, you know, the pace is just too slow at the minute. So actually, looking at the heat and building strategy, you know, we've quizzed the BEIS officials and so on, and you know, they just think that consumers will work it out for themselves with a bit of tuned up, you know, energy advice service. And you know, I know from my own practice, and Russell knows only too well from his business, I mean, it's really quite dangerous. Well, in fact, the Green Deal is the obvious example to use here. You know, if you just plonk in a measure, it can go horribly wrong. You just have to have a more, a kind of a bit more nuanced approach. So having that best practice, you know, will really help people to understand. And I agree with Bill that essentially you've got to get the buy-in there. But I just think, you know, there's an awful lot that needs to be done at both ends of the telescope, really.
Great. Eleanor, I mentioned before you started talking that diversity is important. And I remember working with a group called Women in Construction, who were there because, I'm sorry to harp on about this, but the homeowner often feels much more comfortable with the women coming to look at their home and work there as well, probably during the day while they're still occupying it. Is that something you address, or is that too specific in terms of what people want to do?
I think it's more about, for me, has been, and in a way I've realized that they're so interlinked. Diversity with sustainability are so interlinked. So what happens is you have got very different type of students. So you will have, you know, students from all races, ethnicities, backgrounds, and then perhaps seeing me telling them, you know, you need to embrace sustainability will not have the same impact as someone from their ethnicity or racial background that is much more attuned and can become a role model for them for change. So what we have seen is how certain students' mindset has opened up because they have got different and diverse voices, bringing the perspective from different angles, allowing them to really think through how they will bring them to their own cultures or kind of their own ways of working. So there is definitely a link, Andrew.
Thank you. Yeah. The word trust is something that, again, has been brought up in the chat as a really significant factor. Russell, I don't know why you used it a lot in yours, but is there enough out there, and does leadership build it, or is it something where something perhaps a little bit more, let's say, gentle in terms of how people pick up the knowledge of what they need to do and how they can do it. And again, I'm slightly focusing on the homeowner because I think this is, but you can correct me if you think I've got the wrong perspective there.
Well, do you know, trust is actually formed of three key factors. The first is that whoever you're seeking to be trusted by sees you as authentic, and you can't fake that. And I think that's one of our key issues when we work in, I'm in the RMI sector of construction. Everybody's usually got a thing they want to sell. Even if you're a heating engineer, you've got to deal with Valent, and by gosh, you're going to sell them a Valent boiler. But they've heard that Worcester Bosch is really good because they subscribe to which. And immediately you've got an issue. The conversation has already broken down a little bit because you're not trusted, because you're pushing a thing. But as a heating engineer with gas safe registration, you want to make that person warm for the least cost, ideally, but enough margin in there for you to keep your business ticking over. There are all sorts of factors at play here. The second one is that you need to be offering something from their perspective. Otherwise, it really, they can't relate to it. So therefore, there's an element of trust broken down there again. And the final one is you've got to be a good communicator and be able to communicate, if you're working in this sector, the technical aspects so that they're clearly understood. And we're dreadful at that, aren't we? So in our sector, trust is a massive problem. There's all those different factors where we tend to break that thing down, and it doesn't help at all. It doesn't help, of course, that the householders generally don't know what they're asking for either. And by the time you give them a quote, they definitely didn't expect it to be that high. So we've got all these issues about affordability, understanding the technical elements, industry not necessarily understanding the technical elements either. So trust is about trying to bring everyone to the same place. And we heard the phrase silos earlier on. And this is the point where some kind of agency, and I take Bill's point, actually, it doesn't have to be done at a national level. There needs to be those gaps filled, the knowledge, the communication. We need to fill that in with people that are trustworthy in order to start building up these levels of trust in general across the sector. So I started Retrofit Works, which is a not-for-profit cooperative 10 years ago now, to try and provide that. And it's got two kinds of member. It's the agencies, the advocates that represent householders, and it's the contractors that do the work. We bring them all together in one single organisation that they own in order to start those conversations. And actually, the ultimate aim of our own organisation is that we're not needed anymore in a few years' time because we've solved all of that stuff. We've plugged those gaps. But the one thing that is happening to underline, I think, Bill Bordas's point, the local organisations that are creating the chatter and providing some education, the ones that are really driving all the customers to our cooperative, actually, in Oxfordshire, there are 27 local community-based organisations that are out there with their flyers, and they're knocking on doors and they're telling people that this is a thing. Again, we've got too many customers. They really want to do it. Importantly, because we've presented this in their terms, they're happy to wait for us to get the supply chain sorted out. So we've had people that have been sitting there for 2 or 3 years. The house is fine. They just want to be decarbonised, and they're happy to wait for us to come with a proper offer, which constitute at the moment, we know how to make it work, but we've had to do all these things with these contractors that have never heard of a method statement of contractor, get them trained up before they're ready to do that work. So there's so many different elements to that.
Lynne, is it in your experience of clients, do you get a lot of pushback on those recommendations that really they should be doing if they were fully have the full knowledge of what the impact would be?
I just think that, the national comms are really rubbish. It's as if it's something you do as a sort of hair shirt thing. And actually, when you really experience a well retrofitted home, it's just a different ball game. You're not heating one room. You're actually, you can move freely, it's comfortable, it's healthy. And I just think the comms are all wrong, really. And it's, it shouldn't just be about doing your bit for the climate, which, as I say, on all the discussions I've had in the Cambridgeshire Commission, is seen as a rich person's choice. And I just think it's that national conversation that also needs to happen. So yeah, notwithstanding what Bill says about local delivery, and I do agree with that, but I do think there's a big PR thing that needs to happen.
Nick Falk, you've floated to the top of the pile by, and you asked a question very early on. So I don't know whether you would like to throw that in and challenge our panel.
Net zero.
Okay, well, I'm probably different from most of you because I look at it a bit as an economist and background in management consultancy and so on. And for some 40 years there, but it's been concerned with how to manage change, make change happen. So it seems to us that the key is the street or the neighborhood. You've got to create pressure for change, change attitudes, and that would produce some economies in delivery. I've been trying, as you know, I think, Andrew, to promote innovation in southern India, but we're now trying to create links with Bristol, as it happens, because we feel it's so important that people have good models to follow from. It won't be through thinking they're going to save the planet. It will be because they think that people who they respect are doing something different. And to my mind, that means getting away from the house and focusing on the neighborhood or the street. So my question was really whether the model of the improvement area, which worked quite well in urban regeneration in the inner cities some 30 years ago, I suppose, a long time ago, and I think would still be used in civilized countries, would also apply to this challenge of decarbonizing our country before it's too late.
That's great. Eleanor, sort of picking up on that, the model for education, I've probably spent too long working right next to the Architectural Association, which was to promote their sort of superstar graduates. And that, from what you've said, is not really where we need to be going now. We need to be promoting some other sort of output. Do you start to see the direction for that? Is it promoting model, the building model, the educational model? How do you promote education in that way?
Well, there is a massive say, isn't it, of the cost of education and in certain specific professions. And I think Architecture Registration Board and the RIBA in particular for the architectural routes are looking at different options. Engineering is also looking at very many conversion courses and kind of, the idea and conversion and upskilling. So we have been very gifted in having a lot of funding as well on the leveling up agenda and the lifelong learning for change. And that is starting paying back in seeing some of the results on the upskilling that we have, at least, in professions that perhaps have been very, very focused on commercial gains instead of thinking much more holistically on, all aspects of sustainability. Does that answer your question? Because I'm not going to get into the fees if they're expensive or not expensive. I think we should kind of leave it kind of separate from that.
But I wanted to know how you attract the right sort of people for the agenda that you mapped out so brilliantly with all its complexities.
So how they choose us. So
yes.
At the moment, I think it's reputational. So there is a lot of them becomes reputational. Students, certain people, they will come because of the type of courses that we often offer, like dual degrees, architecture and planning, architecture, environmental engineering. Also the type of open days that we do where we showcase what they will be doing. But a lot of the changes that we have that perhaps they've chosen us instead of a Russell Group university has been reputational over the years and being known for supporting the students in their journey, like this week I have got the biggest passive house development being built here of student accommodation. And we've managed to get with the architect and the contractors that we are going to build a prototype on site with the students, led by the students, in the middle of kind of my lawn in front of the student building. Those types of opportunities create kind of a culture that the students want to kind of change, and pretty much has been reputational, changing the reputation of what we are offering and why are we offering it?
Ben, can I come back to you and ask if you've speculated on how you might influence your neighbours in the 100 other houses in that street where you live? What is there any mechanism for you to connect with them, or could you put one in place?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that actually. I was thinking that we have a street WhatsApp group, as I'm sure lots of streets do, and I should post a message to everyone to say, come round one day, and I can do a tour and tell people about what we did, and they can see that it feels nice and warm and it's comfortable, and maybe that might start to influence people.
Great stuff, because I have a view that, and I think it even went into print in Building Magazine, that we need places where you can greet, share information, inform people without selling them a Valent boiler, Russell. And those empty shops on the high street are the sort of places where you could go, right next to the guy who's building replacement windows. We've got one down the end here. I mean, that's where I think the level of communication would be. But you've already told me, Russell, that's sort of putting people like you, was sort of damaging your business, or at least the concierge concept did. So,
well, unfortunately, we have this real problem with procurement in this country. It's very tough for anyone who works locally to work for anyone that's procuring anything locally. It might be the desired intent of a council officer or a social landlord, but what ends up is this pain in the arse who works in the procurement department that sets up something that is impossible for anyone locally to bid into. That's the reason. That's the problem. Another reason why we set up Retrofit Works, because frankly, a landlord or a council can join the co-op and then they own the supply chain because everyone is a shareholder together and they're all equal.
I think it's a fantastic concept. But given that 80%, as Lynne said, of these houses are in private ownership, that you don't need to worry too much about that procurement issue to get a big slice of a market. Let's call it that for the moment. I'm not sure if it works like a market, but
well, that sort of issue, that sort of thing, Andrew, is the sort of thing that's been keeping me awake for 20 years. The issue we've got is that householders tend to buy from the people that are shouting the loudest. We have this wonderful thought, and I do this all the time, working with the community groups, and we do this, and it has a reasonable success, of attracting the people that turn up at the local farmers market, and they usually got quite a bit of money because they can afford to buy something from a farmer's market. And they have the intent, and if we're in Oxfordshire, they're probably a professor in something or other, and they know what carbon is. So that's an open door, frankly, and these are people that want to do it and have been waiting for a while. But getting everybody else is our problem. And if we don't have a regulatory system that is forcing a builder or an architect, frankly, to design and install something to a good standard, we're absolutely stuffed. We've got nothing forcing the market in any way at all. And again, another conversation I have with my wife very regularly is, why are you working so hard to try and convince people that this is a thing? Frank, she's right. If I'd have become a milkman, people know what milk was, and I'd be able to just go and say, well, my milk is £101.55 for 4 pints, and that would be the end of the conversation. Except I have to have a 4-hour conversation about what retrofit is before I can even tell them what my service is.
So coming towards the end, Eleanor, can you cheer up Russell and convince him that there's enough people coming out of the educational world to...
There is, but Russell, can I say I encountered the same problem with my husband? He's the mathematician in the house, and I had to do all the calculations of kind of, payback of investing in a kind of really sustainable house. But actually, it's being able to hold those conversations and actually consider the options and see how far can you get that makes a step change. So yes, I think we are educating the next generation slowly. And sometimes I think when you ask me, Andrew, to put a position, one of the things is yes, we will kind of educate the next generations for the future, but what happens now? Because I don't think the mindset has changed everywhere in order to make a step change. Sometimes I think, if I go, will my legacy continue driving this focus on those things? Or they will be just saying, screw it, Elena, let's go commercial. And I think kind of me trying to change the mindset and having more critical mass will be the only thing that allowed us a step change in both education and industry.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
And very quickly going around everybody. So what would be your one quick win for now, Eleanor, do you think, in terms of education?
So can I say you what we did last week? I don't know if it's in education. You're going to all hate me.
No, it doesn't have to be. Yeah.
We phoned up, because he's the local MP based in Bristol. We phoned up Jacob Rick-Smoke. Yeah? Yeah. Okay. So we phoned him up and we said to him, what do you know about the decarbonisation agenda? What? And it was really interesting conversation, and it was prompted by my students that they are doing a passive house project in the Masters of Architecture in the area, contacting the MP, and that was really interesting. And what we realized is that's the one, is actually listening to the changes that ISTRAC-T is putting forward in relation to the decarbonisation agenda. And he was quite clued up. And then I thought, right, bring it on. So my students now are kind of reading up on the ISTRAC-T changes to see how they can influence the local community to make a change. And I think those type of conversations that are unexpected, driven by people that they are not the normal subjects, like, for example, ourselves, might have bigger impact going forwards.
Fantastic, thank you. Ben, you got any thoughts about what your quick win might be this month?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, as mentioned earlier, really, I guess getting the guys on site to believe in retrofit and become used by it. And yeah, because it's always difficult for the architect to watch everything on site. So it's, and we have heard from builders who just don't believe in it and aren't interested in it. So yeah, that would be a really great win if we can do that.
Thank you. Lynn, how about you?
Well, my quick win would be to get Elena to restructure architectural education in the UK, because I've worked on as an examiner on her course, and what was amazing was that the joint course, you know, the architectural outcomes from the students who'd had the understanding of the building services side were exceptional and really, really good. That's still true, I'm sure, Elena.
It is, and I'm still trying to change it, actually. So don't give up hope. Never.
So actually, that thinking is really, really exciting. You know, it's just people don't get it until they've tried it.
Thank you, Russell. The last word.
Yeah, there's not one thing though, is there? But I think if there were, it's bringing together the industry in quite rapid fire, really, to get solving some of these interlocking components that we've set out in the national retrofit strategy. We've made a proposal to BEIS to facilitate that. They don't seem willing. I think they think they're going to crack it on their own. They're wrong. So as an industry, we need to set something up, get the conversations happening, solve some of these blockers, and invite them to come along. That's my one thing. But I'm going to need a bit of money. So if anyone's got some, that would be lovely.
Very good, yes. So we've just hit the 6 o'clock number, and I just say that you didn't mention VAT, Russell, which I think is great, but it's one of those things that we could discuss all evening as well, especially with the energy crisis going on right now. You know, perhaps there's a match up there, but for now, just to let everyone know, we have recorded this. We will write it up. It'll be on the Hapoel Foundation website. There's a huge amount of interesting stuff that's worth revisiting, telling your friends about. I'd like to thank all our panelists for absolutely fantastic set of presentations. It's been really interesting and fun to listen on what can be a bit of a dour subject if you're not careful. So thank you for making it really, bringing it to life. And thank you to the Happold Foundation for hosting this. And see you all next time. We are planning something for March. What it will be announced shortly. So thank you very much, all of you, for coming and for your input.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Pleasure.